Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Shawn. This is part 4 of our top 100 favorite board games of all time. And today we are counting down the 60s.
And we've been alternating who starts things off, which means I'm going to get to say the number one game last.
Oh, I didn't even really think about that. I don't think about that every time. But last year I got to do it.
Yeah.
So I guess it's only fair. But this time around, I'm going first. So let's kick it off. My number 70 is Explorers of the North Sea, and it might be a little bit controversial, but this is my favorite in the North Sea trilogy. I know a lot of people love Raiders, and I like Raiders too, but the great thing about this one is it's just like such a sandbox, or watery, I guess, so a sea box of stuff that you can do. And in it it's kind of a tile placement game, and you're kind of at least collectively building out all of these islands in this ocean, but then you're competitively moving around Vikings and exploring and taking all the stuff from those different islands. And that's like animals, you're building up forts and stuff, and then there's an expansion that has like specialized buildings and more stuff you can do. And it's what I always hope exploration games are going to be. It gives me all the stuff that I want. I play so many of these games and wished that there was this stuff, and then I finally played this and thought, aha, that's it, that's what I want.
Yeah, your excitement for exploration games really sold me on this as well. Because I think before I liked it, but you were just like, oh, I love this. I love being able to build different islands and go out. And it is really competitive because it's a whole bunch of the points is who has control over those islands. And so if you try and take control of a big island, you've got a target on your back for somebody to like jump on board and try and steal it from you as well.
And it's cool too because you can do a lot of things, but they're all fairly simple. So it's like deep, but it doesn't have like a giant rule set, or it's not too fiddly or anything. It's just that right amount of like deep and simple. And it is my number 70.
My number 70 is Hadara. And this is one that we got from our friendly local game store. We asked for a recommendation and they suggested it. And we hadn't heard of it at all. So we went in with no expectations. And I really enjoyed it. I was kind of surprised by it because it's a very abstract civilization game. But it's all about drafting to try and basically just move up tracks. But the drafting is always such a difficult decision because every card seems like you want it and it's good enough, but you never have the money. So you have to make some difficult choices about what you're going to take and what you're going to leave for the other player as well. And it plays in like under an hour. And I don't know, the combination of track climbing and drafting, I just really like.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can only really take like half the cards available to you. Like that's more or less what you're going to be able to afford, maybe 2/3. And the drafting itself is that you're going around this circle, and so you're like choosing in order, but that order changes each game, and that order does make a big difference too. So it's got that bit of variability in it as well. And yeah, I really like this one.
Yeah, it is neat that whoever's first that round gets to pick where they start, and that can really influence which cards you take. And it's my number 70.
My number 69 is Terra Mystica. And Terra Mystica, part of the larger family of Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, and the new one now that's coming out.
Age of Innovation, I think.
Age of Innovation, which we haven't played yet. But Terra Mystica is the one that I will always go for if it is a larger player count. I think Gaia Project's better player at 1 or 2, which is what we tend to play at. But if ever there are 3 or more players, Terra Mystica, hands down, is the winner. And Terra Mystica is the better game if you're playing with newer players, because it's surprisingly easy to get people into this game for how heavy the actual game is and the decision space is. The rules aren't that hard, and this is basically it's an engine building, action selection-y, a little bit of area control. It's got a whole mishmash of stuff, and it's very kind of wonderfully Euro. It's so wooden. It's so like classic wooden houses and just circles or buildings. But there's something really charming about that too. And we've played this with a lot of people who don't generally play these sorts of games. And it's just really surprised me how easy it is to get people into this one. And how much fun they have with this. And then it's like, what else is there? What else is there in this sort of game?
Yeah, I can see it really bringing people into heavier games. But the best thing is just like Gaia Project is the asymmetry. And I love all the asymmetric factions. And it just makes such a massive difference. And it comes with like, we got a big box. So maybe there's a few extra ones in there. But it comes with a lot. So that's so much to explore. And we do play it at 2, even though it's not as good as Gaia Project at 2, just because we want to keep playing all the different factions.
Yeah, there's a bot you can play it with that I think came in one of the expansions. I don't know what comes in what because we got the big box, but the bot is solid. But I would say if you're going to play it 2, generally just play Gaia Project, although Age of Innovation maybe plays better at 2 as well. Maybe it bridges that gap, but that is my 69.
My number 69 is Downforce, which is a racing/betting game. And I love racing games. And this is one of my go-to racing games for introducing new players to racing. And it plays, I think, like up to 6, so it's really good for higher player counts. But the betting element means that you can still win the race even though your car maybe didn't race. Because throughout the game, you get the chance to place bets of who might win. So that does make it interesting. It means even if you're doing terribly, you're still in it with a shot. But when we first bought this, we originally were just playing it at 2-player, and it's definitely better with more. But I didn't know that because we hadn't played it with more. And I still really liked it at 2. We would end up with like 2 or 3 cars. And I thought it was still great, even though in hindsight now I do think it's better with more.
Yeah, it works the best at 6 players because on every turn you're playing a card and then you have to move everything, all of the cars on that card. So if you're playing with 6, one of those cars is yours. And 5 of those cars belong to other people. And the great thing about how you move them as well is that you do not have to move them in the most efficient way. So you find these you always have to be going forward if they can, but you find these really creative ways of just getting a car in front of another car. So now it's supposed to move 6, but it can move none because it got boxed in, which is just so unfortunate. So you find these really creative ways to kind of mess with people and then to get rid of those ones that like you don't own orange, but you've got a bunch of orange 5s and 6s. So you wait till it's boxed in and then you play that and it's almost like mocking, like, oh, it's so sad you can't move 6. So it's got just so much interaction and in a really fun, like mischievous way.
Yeah, it's great the first time somebody gets boxed in and realizes that that's possible and they're like, oh, I can do this. But it's a really great racing betting game and it's my number 69.
My number 68 is Tribes of the Wind, which is a pretty new game. And Tribes of the Wind has this really cool system where the backs of everyone else's cards are kind of your resources, or at least they affect the cards that you play. So this is a card playing game where you have 5 cards on this little like card stander thing. And then you can see the backs of everyone else's cards, a bit like a competitive Hanabi. And from the backs of their cards is how it affects the cards that you play. So there'll be cards that are like however many fire cards other people have. Or if you have the most tree cards, or if you have the least water cards, or whatever it might be. So their cards all impact you, which is this really interesting way of having that player interaction. And in the game, it's like this really gentle post-apocalypse. So you're building out this little like wind-powered tree world and you're getting rid of pollution and you're moving around these guys with like flying backpacks and you're living in like an Ewok village. It's really, really lovely art. And it feels a bit like Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, the board game. So if you've seen that Miyazaki film or have read the comic books, it's got kind of that vibe, which is a vibe that I like as well, but that gameplay with the cards is really interesting.
It is really interesting, and particularly at 2 players, because at 2 players you only have one opponent. So what they do instead is to have a row of cards, and those cards are what you are able to pick up on at the end of your turn, but you also use those as like a 3rd player, and that means you have a bit of control over what resources the other players have. And I think it adds a really interesting level.
Yeah, I think it's actually a deeper game at 2 players than it is at more players because there is that interaction with the back of the cards, but it's kind of like a passive interaction. And by using the card row, it becomes a lot more active in like you're going to be messing with it because you know what you've got in your hand, which is really cool. And it's so beautiful. And that is my 68.
My 68 is another beautiful game, and that is Parks. And in Parks, you are hiking along park trails, collecting resources, and trading those in for national parks. But the cards for the national parks all look lovely. And it seems so simple because your hikers can only move forward. So I think the first time I played it, I thought, oh, this is like, it seems a little simple. But then the more times you play it, you realize you can actually like stay on a spot and block other people from using those that spot as well. And you really take advantage of getting the bonus cards that give you like I can't remember what they're called, canteen cards, I think, that give you a bit of a bonus. And it looks so nice, and it's a great game to bring in new people because of the art and because of what seems like a simple gameplay. But once you add the Nightfall expansion, it adds a lot to it too.
Yeah, I love games like this that seem so simple. Like First Rat's another one too, where you look at it and you think, well, that's not going to be good at all, and then it is. It's really good, and it's not like super deep, but it has more depth than you'd think. And man, the components and stuff. Like I love games like this that kind of know that they're gateway games, but then get real prettied up because you know that new players are gonna love this. They're going to see those cards, they're going to feel the wonderful wood and the resources, even just like the trays that those go in. Like everything is so well thought out and put together that it makes it such a solid gateway package.
It is so inviting how everything is put together, and it's my number 68.
My number 67 is Obsession. And when I just looked at the box, I thought, I don't think I'm going to like that. But the cool thing about it is it's this like kind of Jane Austen-y, Downton Abbey-ish kind of theme. But it really is doing it in like a satirical, poking fun at all of those things way. So you're these really fancy people and you're building out your really fancy mansion and you're inviting people over for dinner so that you can like move up in like the ranks of fanciness and all that stuff, which I generally hate. But you're doing it in this like ridiculous way where if you have like the boorish people who are largely Americans, it seems, come over for dinner, it like will knock you down in the fanciness rankings. And just like the rooms and stuff too, like a lot of them are very silly, the things that you're doing. And so I think it really does all of those things in a way that people who really love Jane Austen and that sort of thing are going to enjoy, but also in a way for people who really don't like that sort of thing are going to enjoy because it's so satirical. And the gameplay is really interesting because you got this mix of this deck of cards and you need your cards, the people on the cards, to match up with your locations because you want to use all the different rooms in your house. And then you also have your like staff, like your servant staff, who need to be able to wait on the fancy people in their rooms, and you need to mash those 3 things together to basically to get points.
Yeah, and it can be tough to decide what to do because the people who you are bringing also get you bonuses as well. So you're trying to decide what people you want to attend for their bonuses and then what bonuses you also get from the activity. So I think there is definitely a lot going on, and you can play 2 versions as well. A shorter and a longer version too. And your whole goal as you go is to like seek courtship of one of the right. Fairchilds.
Yeah, there's the fancy Fairchild siblings who are the fanciest people in all the land, and everyone wants their hand or hands. So there's a lot of different things to think about on every turn, and it's a cool, very different from anything else on our shelves. And that is my 67.
My number 67 is Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia. And this is a Stonemaier game, so it looks lovely. All the components are great. And one of the best components are the dice. And it's a dice placement game. But what makes it interesting is that the value of the dice is super crucial for what actions you can perform. So you get to put your dice out to collect resources, but you're also all part of these different factions too. So there's a huge push to try and increase your faction rating. And they've snuck in the dystopian theme in various ways. And one of them is if the value of all of your dice is too high when you bring them back, then they become like too smart for the system. They've caught on and you lose one of your workers, which I think is a clever way of making sure that you don't have too many workers. And then the markets themselves have like really neat names. So I don't think it is like completely immersed in dystopian, but those little touches give it that feeling.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it all the way throughout. And it is this interesting little world of like these 4 different kind of like the underwater and the sky and the different kinds of kingdoms that are mushed in together. And you can definitely see the like 1984 Brave New World influence. And I love that sort of like, I love those kinds of dystopian novels, especially those classic ones. And so I really like all of that in here. And it's on everything. It's on all of the asymmetric character cards that you have as well. And yeah, the markets have hilarious names. And so it's really like steeped in that. And that dice thing of people getting too smart and then leaving is genius.
Yeah, the markets are great and they add in the interaction. But for 2 players, you do have to have the expansion because it adds in bots and makes it a way better 2-player game. And it's my number 67.
My number 66 is Teotihuacan, and this is this dice placement-y game set in this ancient South American civilization, and you're moving these dice around this board to these different places in like an ancient city kind of thing, and you're getting different resources, you're using those resources to build up this temple that everyone's building together. But as your dice move, they get stronger and stronger, a little bit like Euphoria. They're getting better and better at their job. But unlike Euphoria, they don't escape out. Instead, they die. And they kind of want to die. So they're building up and they die and they ascend. And then you move up this ascension track. And when they die, then you gain new dice, which start again at the bottom. And then they slowly build up in age or experience until they die. And so there's like this life cycle thing going on throughout the game, as well as getting these resources and building this temple. And also, you've got to feed them all cocoa. They just eat nonstop. It's nothing but coffee and chocolate in this civilization. So you've just got to feed them all of this cocoa as you move, which makes for this interesting decision of you don't want to move where there's a lot of people because then you got to feed a lot of cocoa. But often, where there's a lot of people, those are the best spaces, and sometimes you're going to benefit from there being people. So there's just a lot of decision points, and I feel like that's a lot of the games on the list this time, but this is very much one of those.
Yeah, I would say this is quite thinky, and part of that is looking to see who else is on the spaces, but also you get a benefit if you can have more than one dice on a space. So often you're going to try and like leave a dice and get your other dice workers to eventually get to that space and do a stronger action. But you could end up in a position where now everybody's there and you're like, oh no, I can't afford the cocoa to feed everybody.
And it's got all of these different expansions that are super modular, and so you can kind of take them apart with asymmetry and stuff, and they add to the game in a lot of interesting different ways, and that is my 66.
My number 66 is King Domino Origins. And in King Domino, you are building out a kingdom out of domino tiles. And I really like the big, chunky, colorful tiles. And the Origins version has basically the original version plus 2 alternative ways of playing, of just adding in a few extra bits. So I like the options of being able to increase the complexity just a little. But I really like playing at 2 players, because at 2 players, you get 2 workers you can use for drafting, and you can do the big like 7x7 grid where you get to use all of the tiles and just make a really epic kingdom.
Yeah, we've been playing King Domino since this was kind of one of our early board games, I think, and it is such a good gateway game. And I've played with more than 2 like once or twice. I feel like this is a 2-player game. It's so much better at 2 players, being able to draft the 2 each round. It's just such an interesting decision because you can take one of the stronger ones are always on the bottom of the 4 that are available. So you can take one of the stronger ones and then also just give up to take one of the weaker ones, because then you can get the stronger ones again next time. So it's an interesting like thinking about what's going to be my draft order as well as what are going to be my tiles.
Yeah, and the draft order is really interesting. And for Origins, I really like the module that comes with the resources, because I love the woolly mammoths and the spears and the fish. There's all kinds of great resources. And because it's a pretty simple game, it can use that additional slightly higher complexity, and is my number 66.
My number 65 is Honey Buzz. And Honey Buzz it's a game about bees making honey and selling that honey to the other creatures in the forest. And in Honey Buzz, you're putting down bees on these worker placement spots, then you're gaining chunks of your hive. And then as you make these little like hexes within your hive, you're also setting off these actions within your hive. So you have actions that set off actions, and you've got these bees that are like separately gathering these like little nectar things that go in the middle of those hexes, which let you lay down these really delicious looking, if I could eat something from a board game, this was like my number one. I want to eat these so bad things, but they're these little jelly things, and that's what you're selling to the animals in the forest. And it's cool that you've got these like two different layers of ways that you're setting off actions.
Yeah, and you have a lot of choice for when you do that, because you might really want to set off like a bunch of actions and have your hive connect in a way that lets you do that. But you're absolutely right. It will totally depend on where your other bee is to be able to collect the nectar. And this, again, from our list, is yet another one that's really lovely. All of the components are gorgeous.
Yeah, and we only have the retail as well, and I feel like I'm always singing the praises of just get the retail, but it's all you need. I don't know what else the Kickstarter would have. The retail is lovely. It's all you need. And it's got this cool economic system as well, that where you can sell the nectar back, so you can sell it to the animals, but you can also just sell it back to this market and get a lot of points that way too. So it's got some different paths to victory as well. Super interesting game, and that is my 65.
My number 65 is Manhattan Energy Project, and we first played Manhattan Energy Project at a convention, and we immediately loved it. We didn't have the time to finish the game, but we thought, we're buying this. This is amazing. And so we bought it right away, and then when we went to play it again, we were finding it was not as good of an experience. It was taking a really long time. Turns out we were missing like the most crucial rule. And you're supposed to always take pollution from the stacks. And the stacks of pollution is what sets the pace for the game, and like when the rounds end and when the game ends. So our games were lasting like 3 or 4 times longer than they were meant to. And it's on us, because it tells us in the rules very clearly about this rule.
Yeah, it says it like 15 different places in bold, underlined, like, don't forget, don't miss this rule. You have, and we were rereading the rule book and just somehow not, like, we just had rule blindness for that one rule. It was insane. But now that we play it correctly, it is so good. It's such an interesting, cool game, and it's this worker placement game, but also really a lot of resource management, because you're adding these buildings and you've got so many workers and so much energy, and they're these really thick, lovely cardboard. And so you're using them to go to places, and then you're using them to set off your buildings. And then as you come back each time, you're like moving this clock, which was what we were not moving.
Yeah, the pace can go so quickly, and the pollution can really ramp up. And so you're constantly also trying to mitigate that, because usually the stronger actions will also give you pollution as well. But the tokens too are lovely. I love the oil tanks. Those look amazing. And before we were feeling like, oh, you can do everything, what's the point? But now it goes so fast that you can't do everything. And it is my number 65.
My number 64 is Meadow. And Meadow is this card drafting game, this really cool card drafting system where there's a tableau of cards and you're placing your little like numbers on the outside, and then that's helping you take cards, but it's also blocking people off from taking cards. And as you get those cards, you're building out your little nature tableau, and it's kind of a food chain thing where you're putting like birds on top of bugs, and then larger predators on top of birds, and then it's like the stuff that eats the stuff as you build it out. But what has made it way more interesting is the downstream expansion, and it's one of my favorite expansions really for any game, because you've got this little river, or actually two rivers because you can choose each side, and now you've got this kayaker that moves along the river as you do your card drafting and everything else. And that kind of, it makes you feel like you're in the game. Like before, I felt like I was just like me playing this game, and now I can feel like, oh, I'm this kayaker and I'm moving along this, and it lets you chain these different bonuses, it adds different cards, and it just adds so much to the game.
It definitely adds a lot, and it includes time. It does take longer a little bit to play with downstream, but that length of time is definitely worth it because it adds that extra layer. And Meadow is just gorgeous. I mean, the artwork is incredible, and I really like, for the downstream, the lighthouses and all the water artwork they've added in too. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's really lovely. Yeah, downstream adds all of these marine animals to it as well. So now you've got otters and stuff. And who doesn't love otters? They're great. If you don't, you otter. And that is my number 64.
My number 64 is Obsession.
Ooh, a double up.
Yep, and so I won't say too much about it because we've already talked about it in this section, but we first bought Obsession really for me because, like you said, the cover is very Jane Austen, and I was like, I would love to play this game. But some of the things we didn't talk about is you are also asymmetric families, so that's really interesting every time you play to choose a different family that might start with maybe a bit more money or a bit more reputation or an extra servant. So that kickoff to the game changes a little bit how you're playing. And I just really like that you're basically drafting your actions because those activity tiles that you get are the activities that you can do. I love games where you get that choice of what actions you're able to perform.
Yeah, this is a game where you can really build out in different ways and build super different engines from game to game, and it can feel really different. And I feel like, even though I did mention a lot about how much it's kind of making fun of that, I really didn't enough, because it's even like the words on the bottom of every single guest has a little bit about them, and they're so hilariously tongue-in-cheek, and there a weird number of them relate to whist, which I have never played, and I really now want to dress up fancy and have like a fancy whist night.
I think this is one of the few games that we do read the flavor text, because a lot of games include it and you just kind of glance over it, but it's so clever sometimes. It is worth reading, and that is my number 64.
My number 63 is Paladins of the West Kingdom. And this is probably the heaviest of any of the West Kingdom or any of the Shem Phillips games, I think, to date. And in this, it's really an abstracted kind of resource management game where workers are part of your resources, and there's money, and there's, I don't even know, these little brown things that show up a lot in the West Kingdom and North Sea series. And in it, you're just trying to stretch out your turn as long as you can. So you draft workers, and you're putting those workers on the little worker-shaped spaces on your board. And you're doing stuff like you're gaining buildings that make it so you can do less workers there in the future. You're just putting them out on the board on this one board that get you workers back, and you're gaining these blue like vases. I cannot overstate how abstracted this game is, but it's really this like heads down multiplayer solitaire game, and I say that in the most loving possible way. But because of that, I think this game really shines either at 2 players or at solo.
Yeah, there really is so little interaction that there would be no point in playing with more than 2 players because all you're doing is adding more time. But the most interesting decision you make on your turn is which paladin, which is like one of the cards you choose to play, because it gives you different like workers and bonuses, and you have a choice of 3. And one you play, one goes to the top of your pile and one goes to the bottom. And so that one that goes to the bottom, you won't see for a while. And they all are good, so you want to use them all. So it's about which one you use when.
Yeah, it is really interesting how all these different parts play together, because there's also these like goal cards and these other cards that kind of add worker spaces as the game goes along. So there's more options to it. But all of that put together makes it my 63.
My number 63 is Suburbia, which is a city building tile placement game. And I love the engine you're building. Every time I feel like our cities are always so different because it's entirely dependent on what tiles are available in the market. And usually you tend to kind of lean in to whatever tiles you end up getting early. Like I had one that gave me money every time a green tile got added in. And then I managed to get another tile that also did that. So then all of a sudden, my whole city was filled with like the green residential tiles. And that always tends to happen because you always obviously want to get the bonuses that you can activate. So you'll keep trying to get those bonuses.
Yeah, and I think the timing of this game, like when the game ends, is perfect. I always feel a little bit like I wish my city was bigger, but I also think there's no way I could hold anything more in my brain. Like, because you've got to remember, you'll have something that says something like that. You get 2 for every residential, but then you'll have something else that's like, if anything's adjacent, you'll have something else that's like, if they build a commercial, then you get this. And so then you've got to really be remembering, oh, I've got this and this and this and this. And by the time the game ends, you're at full brain capacity.
Yeah, they have definitely like pinpointed that exact moment when you're like, I can't remember anything more, but it's such a great feeling to almost feel like you're getting a benefit every time a tile gets played. And it is my number 63.
My number 62 is Botoku, and Botoku is just this super beautiful game with this wonderful like Japanese spirit theme, and it's got this cool, I feel like we've been talking a lot about games that have a cool mishmash of different interesting mechanics, and this very much does. And here it's card play and dice placement. So you've got this little deck of cards that you're building up throughout the game, and those are giving you different actions. But also they are releasing these dice. So either you're playing a card to get actions or you're playing a dice out to the board. And then the number on the dice relates to how much it gets of whatever it is that you place it on. And where you're placing those does things like adding buildings or moving your little guy along on like this journey and visiting different things. Or you're also gaining these really beautiful animal cards that you're also visiting along your board. And it's all these different things, but it's not that heavy because it's really just play a card or play a dice, and then those will lead you down these different paths, but it kind of holds your hand down those different paths as well.
Yeah, on your turn, what you're doing is pretty simple, but choosing what to do is where it gets difficult because you might need to try and race for a spot before your opponent does, or there might be a specific building that you know you both want, so you definitely want to try and get there first. So the timing of what actions you do is so important.
And that is my 62.
My number 62 is Seven Wonders Architects, and I like Seven Wonder Architects best of all of the Seven Wonders series, and I think it's just because it's the simplest version. On your turn, you're just taking a card, and you either take the one on your right, the one on your left, both of which you can see, or you take the one in the center that you can't see. And I just love that simplicity. But each of you are these different civilizations. So you are all trying to build a wonder, and the wonders look amazing. But the bonuses that you get for building them are different depending on which civilization you are. But I really have come to appreciate games that are really simple, that you can play with a bigger group of people that may not know the rules, and you can kind of have like a chat while you're playing because nothing is really too complicated. You're not going to get stuck really thinking about what you need to do for a long time.
Yeah, and this is the only one on the list so far that we don't own. So we're not going to have any photos for this because we don't have anything to take photos of because we just play friends' copies, or this is one that we'll play at board game cafes pretty often, or we'll play this on BGA quite a bit. And I agree, I really like this. The only reason I didn't think about this is because we don't own it, and we would, but it's just a bit too big of a box, and we just know enough people who have it that we can play their copies of it, and it's not really a 2-player game. This is a game that you need more people for. So we've got one set of friends who we make them play this with us every single time we go to their house. So it's almost like we have a copy just at someone else's house.
Yeah, it's just a really nice like warm-up game as the first game you play for a game night, and it is my number 62.
My number 61 is Fields of Arle, and I've talked about this in past lists, and I believe the last time on this list I had never won a game. Well, I've got an update for you. I have still never won a game. I cannot beat Jess at this game. And I still love it. So that says so much. We have played this game like 15 times now, and I've lost 15 times. And it's not even like I'm getting creamed almost every time. And I'm trying different strategies. Like there's a ton of strategies that you can do in this game where it's kind of like an Uwe Rosenberg farming game. But there's like more to it, I feel like, than a lot of his farming games. It is the biggest 2-player only game that I know of. And you're adding buildings to your farm, you're getting different animals, which is all I used to do. And I've learned not to just do that now. And you're just doing all sorts of different farming stuff, as well as visiting different villages. And it's really like a worker placement game. And you're putting out workers on this big shared board. And then you're chaining them. So you're chaining the resources you have with ways to spend those resources. And it's really cool and it's really smart. And I just do not know how to play it better than Jess can play it, but I love it anyway.
And I love that it exists, because for 2-player games, typically the go-to is to make it a small box, make it a dual version. And this is just a straight-up farming game that's 2 players exclusively. There isn't really a reason for that. I feel like more people could go on the actions, but it works great at 2. And the theme is pretty typical. They've added in that this one's like peat farming as well. So
there's a lot of peat, which are these black cubes.
Yeah, so you have to spend a lot of time like clearing off the peat. Apparently it's representative of like the area he grew up in, but just lots of the great things you like about the Uwe Rosenberg farming games in a 2-player version.
Yeah, and I hope that when we do this list next year, that first of all, that I haven't got so frustrated that I don't like it anymore, but also that I can finally report that I've won. But so far, I can't, but it is still my number 61.
My number 61 is Tang Garden. And in Tang Garden, you are all contributing to the building of this lovely, peaceful garden. And you do this by taking one of the tiles and adding it to the garden, usually trying to kind of match up terrains or close off terrains. Or you can take a decoration card and add decorations. And some of those decorations are lovely. They've got these bridges and these pagodas that you add. And in the meantime, as you're doing this, you're also advancing on these tracks. And at certain points, when you've got far enough, you can put your character out to stare at the beautiful scenery and get a new character. And what your character wants to look at will totally depend on each character type, because you're also adding these like landscape views to the tile that have these different icons that represent what each individual person finds lovely.
And this is one of my favorite kinds of games, where it is a game that looks so gentle and wonderful and is secretly incredibly cutthroat, because so much of it is taking the tile that you know the other person wants, or if they want to look a certain direction, they want to look at something, making sure they definitely cannot look at that thing, or like you're getting in their way, or you're moving stuff around. And this, just those 3D, like the 3D-ness of some of the decorations and how you build it. Oh, this game looks so beautiful. This has one of the best table presences of any game. And I'm not usually like a huge sucker for games. Like I enjoy my beige Euros very much. But this one, it's just so lovely. It's impossible for it not to win you over.
It is lovely. And I love the transformation of the black and white outline to the colorful garden that comes to life. And it is my number 61.
And that is it. That gets us pretty much to the end of the 60s, but next time we'll be counting down the 50s.
And then we're going to be at the halfway point, which is exciting.
Yeah, we're only one video away from the big top half of the list, but you know what? I think this is where the sneaky gems are. Any sucker can watch 1 to 10, but 50 to 60, that's where the ones that like fly under the radar. Like that's like the cool hits your friends don't know about. about.
But for the ones that we just did talk about, please do let us know in the comments if you've played those games. And as usual, please like and subscribe. And hopefully we'll see you next time for another game.